Well, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thanks for joining us for the latest in our webinar series. And I'm delighted to be hosting this discussion today, looking at digital transformation, shared services and GBS, some trends, benchmarks and insights based on the SSON Research Analytics State of the Industry 2024. So thanks very much for your attention. It's also what's called T-Bang, the Caterpillar has a new skateboard. And we'll come on to that in a minute, but as you'll see when our guest talks, we had this conversation last year and we talked about transformation. And is transformation really the metamorphosis from caterpillar to butterfly, or is it something more mundane going on? But I'm sure we'll see that imminently. But I'm Dan French, I'm the one on the left. I'm very pleased to be sitting here with Tom Bangemann, who has more jobs and job titles than PowerPoint can deal with. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you.
And it's astonishing you managed to do all that in a working week. But this T-Bang thing, where did that come from, Tom?
I actually don't know. I thought you would know.
Did you have a previous, like a rapper or anything?
We did a song together, but
yeah, that wasn't a rap song. No. I think actually I recall there was a conference maybe last year or the year before in the US, and the headline speaker was Alex Rodriguez, the famous baseball player, and he goes by the name of A-Rod. And I seem to remember you, and I think it was tongue in cheek, but you said, "Why don't I have a stage name?" And so you got a stage name. It's T-Bang. So that now you know. When you're looking at all that stuff about the webcast, what was T-Bang all about? Now you know. So this is what we're going to cover. I'm just doing brief introductions here. Tom is going to talk us through the research and some of the insights that are really fascinating out of that. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about what we might be able to learn from that, what we can do with it, and then we'll have some Q&A. So please enter your questions into the GoToWebinar interface as we go. We advertise this for 30 minutes. It might be a little bit longer, so we'll get to the questions we can get to. If we don't get to your question, we will respond by email. So please get the questions in anyway. So with that, you will probably know that Tom wrote the book on shared services, the very first book. And I think it was a little bit like maybe Tablets of Stone from the Mountain at the time. But actually, this is a book. If you want to get it, it's still available on Amazon and still highly relevant, actually. But this has evolved again with Tom's stewardship to the latest State of Shared Services and Outsourcing Industry 2024. So that's quite a biblical story there, Tom. So over to you.
All right, thank you, Dan. So this is a short run through some of the relevant topics in shared services and GBS. Obviously, we cannot cover everything, but I always select a few things that I find interesting, and I hope that is also your view on this after the presentation is done. Here's a slide about what are your top objectives this year. And when you look at these types of slides, typically the content changes a little bit, but there's about half the topics dealing with talent or people, and about half the topics are dealing with technology. That's often what you see. So you can see it here, upskilling and leveraging automation platforms, talent and technology. But this year we had something else in place 3, which always means that if something else is that high on the list, it's actually a very relevant topic. And it's rethinking, shifting our operating model. And there's quite a lot of discussion about operating models or the GBS model as such, and people are wondering whether it is sustainable, whether it is the right model for the future, whether there are some changes that we should do to this model or improvements we should do to this model. So that is the relevant discussion. And because of that, I thought I'll put in a few slides that explain where we are sort of in terms of utilization or usage of this model in general. Now, do you operate a GBS? Now, there's no legal definition for GBS, so you might call your organization whatever you want. But we all know that what we mean with that term typically is a multifunctional, multi-regional, center-based setup. And we can see that a lot of people use that kind of setup, and there's more and more who sort of convert to the GBS philosophy. And we also asked people whether they think this model is sustainable. And we can see 70% said yes, it will increase in scope and impact, or just yes, it works. So a very large majority of these people thinks that this is a good model and they will keep using it. Now, you can still have a different opinion, right? You don't have to have a majority opinion. I'm always happy when people have good comments and a different view to discuss those. But just to give you a market overview, quite a lot of people are convinced that this is still something that we will see going forward. What is also happening is that in the scope of GBS, people are moving more towards the core activities or closer to the actual core business. That has to do with the philosophy of trying to provide more value or value add or do something with a purpose. And to do those things, of course, there's nothing wrong with doing accounts payable, accounts receivable, and so on. But more often people feel that they need to do something with a bigger value contribution to actually stay relevant for the business. What I find interesting is when you think about the fact that the scope is changing from the original, very transactional, factory-based setup to something which is more value-adding, more multifunctional, multi-regional, bigger in scope. And that means that you can't necessarily report within one function. So therefore, the reporting line also has been moving. And we can see on this slide that 14% nowadays, for example, report to CEOs, and that means group CEOs. 10 years ago, this number was basically 0. And there's an increasing amount of people reporting to CEOs, COOs, we could list that next time if we wanted, and CFOs, and CFOs often also own procurement and or IT, so therefore that is actually in most cases also multifunctional and not just finance. And if you ask people about their strategic targets, again you can see cost is on top of the list. Cost is always in the top 3. You can tweak this slide any way you want. Cost never goes away. But whenever times are difficult, it is in position 1, and when times are easier, it might drop into 2nd or 3rd place. What also changes is things like compliance or risk-related questions. When times are hard, you have a lot of crises, a lot of things going on in the world, these themes become relevant or more prevalent. People see that, and therefore they score them higher. And whenever we get rid of all the crises and wars again, they will drop to much lower percentage again. I thought this was an interesting topic. I would call it naming strategy. You might wonder what this is about, but what we see happening is that apart from calling your organization something that actually reflects what you're doing, there's also naming strategies in, let's say, in a marketing sense or in an aspirational sense. And often people move from some shared service terminology to some GBS type terminology. So you might have, for example, company name plus business services, which is quite a common solution to use. But the latest that we observe is that we convert the S from services to solutions. So organizations who have a S in their abbreviation start using it not for services but for solutions, and they feel that a solution is something bigger or more mature or broader, whereas a service is more an activity-based or process-based activity. A solution is more or less a team that finds an answer to your question or problem. So therefore, if you're higher maturity, you think you're higher maturity, or you want to be higher maturity, maybe solution can be something that can be used even if it's just aspirational. There is also, in context with the model, a lot of discussion about the sourcing mix, and some of the BPO companies, for example, had fairly flat or even reduced revenues in the last couple of years, and therefore there was a discussion about outsourcing and whether that is increasing or decreasing, or whether companies should use that in the future. Everybody has a view. Often the views on this topic are fairly religious, so you're strongly against or strongly in favor. You can all have your views, that's all fine. I will just contribute some data to tell you that if you ask people what they are planning to do, then most of them are saying that they are planning to increase their use of outsourcing. Now, this refers obviously to volume, So if you increase the volume of your outsourcing, that might still result in less fees, right? Because the pricing might be adjusted. And then to the topic of locations, I find locations and the number of centers in these locations a really fascinating topic. There has basically been a change in this trend after 25, 30 years of setting up shared services and GBS organizations. We were always following the logic that we would try to consolidate into as few locations as possible. And there were different names for different kinds of strategies. For example, follow the sun, or 3 times 8 hours equals 24 hours. So you can have sort of 3 centers globally. And if they're in different time zones, say in the Americas, in Europe, and in Asia, you can move activities across the 3 centers. You have at least 1 center always in operation, and you can cover 24 hours. And this would be a great model to have a sort of basic global coverage. And most companies were trying to get to these 3 centers, and they got close. They never really got to 3 because they had something in China for China, or they needed an extra center in Brazil, or they maybe had operations in Russia and couldn't do that from the outside. So you ended up with, in most cases, 3 to 6 centers if you really had global operations. And this is also what you see on this slide, that many companies have maybe 1 or 2, 3 if they just cover a region, for example, but if you're global, then often 4 to 6. So what happened now is that in a recent research piece from SSON, we found out that most people, the majority of people, are thinking of expanding their footprint. So it means more locations. So they're diverting from the strategy of trying to consolidate further to actually utilize different labor markets, tap into the opportunities of these different labor markets because of the shortage we have on some skills and capabilities, and also to mitigate risks in some cases. Also, technology allows us to run significantly smaller center sizes very efficiently nowadays. So therefore, there's a sort of list of reasons why you could run an efficient GBS with also more centers and more locations. And on the location front, we did a piece. I thought this was really interesting. It generates a lot of discussion, because everybody will have a definite opinion on what location is good and what location not. So, you know, this can become emotional, and some people complain to me about this, but let me just tell you, this is perception of people who responded to this survey. So I'm just telling you what they think. And of course, these people also have a bias. But what I thought was interesting is that if you look at the different categories and different regions here, then just to give you an example how you should read this picture is, if you take India on the top, we go through cost, workforce availability, and so on, the different categories, then we see that it's dark colors almost in every category, and dark is good. That means high rating. So India is seen as a very good location in terms of 5 out of these 6 dimensions. Just customer centricity is something that most people think India cannot produce or is not very good at. Now, that might be right or wrong, right? But that is a very common perception. So if I was selling India, I would need to do something especially on that topic, because that's the one topic that they do not seem to shine on. And if you look at other regions here, for example, on the bottom, you have Middle East and Africa, then of course, to be fair, that's a fairly big region. There's a lot of different countries in it. So to put Egypt and Dubai in the same category is not very good. So I admit that, but this is just sort of an initial view on the region. Of course, Egypt would be cost-wise India plus 10 or India plus 20%, so very competitive, and Dubai not, because it's more in European or Western levels. So therefore, it can be different for different countries. And what we did then, we said, okay, if that is a perception, what is the reality? We did the same picture in terms of the same dimensions and same regions, but with real data that we sourced out of different sources. Some of it is in SSON and some of it is market data. We added one on the right side, political stability, just because it's in the current environment a relevant category. And you get a similar picture. And now comparing these two might be a little bit work intensive, so let me do it for you. If you put them on top of each other, you get this. And what it means is, if you just look at the right side, is that in India, for example, we see a -6. That means reality is worse than perception. So the perception about what India can do, even though India wins, even in real data, the perception is even better than the reality. And then there are some regions like North America or Australia, New Zealand, or Middle East and Africa, where our perception is too bad, is too negative. If you go through real data, the real data is significantly better. In total, if you add all the pluses and minuses in the right column, you get an interesting result. If you add all the pluses and minuses, you get fairly close to 0, which means that if you have a lot of people and they all tell you their perception, then while individually they might be biased and wrong on this and that, in total, the whole picture is actually fairly accurate. I thought that was quite an interesting outcome. By the way, we'll do a webinar with SSON next week on Latin America details. We have looked into this column to find some more details and explain why the perception was a bit negative on things like innovation, for example. And that will come out next week with very interesting data, if you're interested and have time.
I'll share the details for that with the attendees.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Dan. Okay, and then the process owner topic. I think that's a fascinating topic. If you think about it, we have been trying to organize the work in shared services with a process dimension or process view now for 20, 30 years. We often have people who run process teams. We try to install these process owner type roles. We did a process ownership research piece also about 1.5 years ago in SSON. It came out with the same result as every other research I've ever done before, that 80% of people do not get a lot of benefit out of this, but 20% get fantastic results. However, it's utilized as a concept by almost everybody and in a wide range of processes. So not just 3, 4, 5 processes, but across really 20 processes and more. So it cannot be the concept that is the problem. It must be the implementation. And therefore, I keep sort of showing this slide because I think this is one of those levers that you can use to really improve efficiency and effectiveness, but it has to be done correctly. Just putting name tags on the door does not do the job. And then let's do a little bit something on people, talent, because obviously we all have the same issue with finding enough skills and capabilities in the right places, in the right numbers. And if you look at the efforts that people are making to attract talent in general, so this is the attraction piece of the talent management cycle, you find a lot of vocabulary in here that talks about value proposition or purpose-led vision or branding, things like that. Those are things that we didn't have on these lists sort of 10, 15 years ago, but they're increasingly relevant. And especially the branding topic is one that I found to be quite interesting. And we did an extra research piece on branding in SSON about also 1.5 years ago. And it came to the conclusion that about half the people are using branding and half are not. But the half that has not been using branding has recognized that there is a point in doing something on this topic. Not because you can replace good operations. I mean, you always need good operational basis. You cannot get to a good result without doing the work. But what you can do with branding, of course, you can impact the perception. You can influence the view that people have on the organization. You can change the view that it's a transaction factory to being more of a service solution oriented, value providing, purpose-led organization, whatever you want it to be based on your branding approach. But it is helpful to use branding to accomplish that. And then Gen Z, I thought this slide was fantastic. Last year, when we looked at it, we came up with 93% of Gen Z saying that they will leave the company in 3 years or less, which of course produces a huge fluctuation. That means we need to have very standardized and efficient processes and training programs to be able to compensate for this. Now we know this is the case. The good news on the slide is that in the last year, that percentage has dropped significantly. So now we already have 16% of people who are willing to consider staying longer than 3 years. So maybe this will balance out over the next couple of years. Still means that we need very good, very efficient and standardized recruiting and training processes. And then automation. You can measure automation all kinds of different ways. This is a very simple question. It is based on perception. So people just say, I think I am high or expert or whatever in automation. Now remember the perception-based slide we had on locations. We know from that and from all kinds of different other research pieces we have done that people are actually quite good at estimating whether their automation is good or not. And they're typically also fairly honest in an anonymous research piece. So what this tells us is that in shared services and GBS, for 30 years plus, we're trying to automate as much as we can. That's the core activity we're doing. And the result after all this time is 17% are high or expert in automation. So you might say, well, yes, some of those only started last year or recently, so they can't be that good yet. I would argue that we have been trying to automate this space for 30 years plus, whether it was included in your GBS scope or not. And therefore 17% being highly automated or better is actually not a very good result in my view. Also means there's still quite a lot of work to be done in this area. And if we compare this in the same question, the automation level, with another piece of research we did, you might know there's a competition, an award in SSON for the world's best GBS. And we typically have between 30 and 50 companies who apply for that. And needless to say that, of course, all of those are very good. Otherwise, they wouldn't even apply for an award like that, but they're all good. Now, if we take the top 5 out of this competition and look at their automation level, then we see that top 5 are 40% in high or expert categories. The others from this award application at 30, compared with the 17 for the average or total market that we just saw on the previous page. So obviously automation does produce performance and maturity, and all these things correlate in a positive way. You can argue about the causality of it, of course, but at least we can see that automation is necessary to move up on this value chain or move further on your slide from bottom left to top right or whatever it is that you're looking at. But automation definitely is a key component. And then in terms of automation, so if you ask people, well, what kinds of tools are you actually prioritizing in your shared service organization or GBS? It's interesting that you get answers like data analytics on top of this list. And then if you ask a slightly different question, you ask, okay, so this is your priority list. What are you actually putting your time and money into? And then you get the top 3 technology investment priorities. Analytics is on there, but it's only at 30% now compared to the 84%. And interestingly, most people are working very hard still on RPA and ERP. At the same time, of course, when we do webinars, the only thing people really want to know is AI, and even better, Gen AI. That's where 80% of the questions are. But the reality in terms of where projects are and where the money is spent currently is still RPA and ERP. And then in terms of Gen AI, no presentation without Gen AI, of course. There was a whole piece of research we did last fall in SSON just on Gen AI. And some of the highlights are, for example, that most people say the difficult thing is to get started and to know how to get started. And initially, we have often the problem that nobody's really owning the topic, or many people want to own it. So how do we do this? Who should own it? Who should run this? And you can see here that a collaboration of GBS and IT seems to be quite a logical approach to this. Of course, it could also be owned by GBS itself or some digital teams wherever they sit, but that's what most companies are planning to do. And then if you ask about how they adopt or plan to adopt generative AI, then the biggest mention on top of the list is upskilling an internal team. And now comes the problem with that. What is slowing down generative AI adoption? Internal team capability. So again, you could talk about the causality. You could say, well, we don't have the capabilities and therefore we need to train or upskill people. And that is logical, makes sense. But of course, it will slow down the speed of this process. And this is a topic where we actually don't have that much time to spend on. So it might be a good idea to utilize some external support just to get going faster on this topic. And then to come to the conclusion. So we saw this in the beginning, Dan showed it already. Transformation, which means metamorphosis, that's a Greek word for the same word. And of course, the idea is that the caterpillar becomes a butterfly. That's what we mean by transformation. And of course, this is a nice joke. Most companies think it is actually just making the caterpillar faster. That's not really transformation. So what would this look like if we now used, for example, Gen AI to transform our process? And the solution that we got with Jan when doing this is that we now get the elephant on the skateboard. And that's why the caterpillar now has a new skateboard. So, and whether this is hallucinating or not, you can decide. But that was my quick run through some highlights in terms of GBS and shared service developments and trends and an overview. I hope there was something in it that you're interested in. And with that, I'll hand it over to Dan, who's going to add a few thoughts of his own.
Thanks very much, Tom. That's great. I love your generated elephant there on the. You can make a lot of jokes about that. So, okay, we're just going to see what we can learn from that. There's a lot to unpick there, Tom. So, if you must have questions on this, so please get your questions into the GoToWebinar interface. As I say, if we can't respond to them all today, we'll at least respond by email. So these are the themes, Tom, you talked through. This is just a summary of what you covered. The operating model, objectives, end-to-end processes and GPOs, talent, branding, automation and technology, Gen AI, of course. But when you look at all that, where do you think the real priority area for GBS is? Where do we got to put our focus?
All of this is, of course, important, and you will do whatever is relevant in your organization at a certain point in time. But I would remind us all of the fact that the whole point of doing shared services is to automate as much as possible to make things more efficient and effective. So I think automation and technology are the main activity or the main topic to look at. And maybe linking this up with other things on the list. I mean, I did show some information on GPOs and process ownership and so on. And of course, we can only automate things if we really look at the processes from a process point of view and end to end. I know it's a buzzword, but it really means looking at a process from where it's initiated to the actual recipient or the actual output. And that often is cross-functional, and therefore end to end process ownership in combination with automation, I think might be a good approach to go on with it.
That's great, Tom. Thanks. So, I mean, again, SSON's own research said that 87% of GBS leaders agree end-to-end process integration is top priority. So, I think we see the process and technology thing hand in hand. And of course, all these things seem obvious. We can nod, yeah, end-to-end makes sense, yeah, digitalization, yeah. But as we all know, there's a world of difference between just nodding and saying, yeah, that makes sense. And I'm sure you've all seen the Dunning-Kruger curve, that when we, on the far left-hand side, we tend, even very intelligent people tend to be very confident about things they have very little experience in. If you have the good fortune or misfortune to have to implement those ideas, you realize as you go through the curve that your confidence drops with experience until eventually you become a subject matter expert. But even there on the right-hand side, you're never as confident as you were when you're a naive optimist. And I think this is going to be the same. It's the same for processes, it's the same for technology, it's the same for generative AI. So I'm sure we've all been involved in initiatives like that. So Tom talked about the fact we've been doing shared services for 30 years, and we know that kind of when you look at it in one respect, change happens very slowly. We saw some of the statistics, but also some things happen very sudden. So it's kind of an interesting dichotomy. And we look at, you've seen all the research, whether it's 70, 85% of digital transformations don't deliver the value projected. That's a concern. It doesn't mean these things are a failure, but it does mean that we're over optimistic on the impact and certainly the timescale to deliver. And of course, right now with the generative AI and AI hype cycle right now, this made me laugh. It's a little bit of lighthearted relief, but Oral-B toothbrushes are now sold with added AI. I'm not quite sure whether the AI is in the bristle or in the marketing, but it just brings a wry smile. But the point is that when we get fixated on a particular technology, we've got a hammer and everything looks like a nail. We did the same with blockchain. We do it repeatedly. We did it with RPA. So it's just worth thinking about. And I asked ChatGPT to generate an image of what would the future of GBS and shared services look like. And obviously, by scraping all the available information in the web, obviously a lot of technology, a lot of drones. I haven't yet seen drones in GBS and the physical robot, but it's kind of amusing and interesting to see how that image, what that's based on the prevailing information. But we got to remember that this is a great mantra, and I believe in this wholeheartedly. It's worth, I think it's worth putting on the wall. Technology and digitalization is amazing. And when we apply digitization to an operation or a process that's efficient in design, the digitization, the automation will magnify the efficiency. That's what we're aiming for. The real scary part is if we apply automation or technology to an inefficient operation or process, it doesn't just produce no positive impact, it magnifies the inefficiency. We lose money. We create more inefficiency, more manual work. It's awful. And I think most of us have seen some of that as well. And we're in this world in GBS and shared services where largely the operation, what we own and what we execute in GBS and shared services on the right-hand side of the process. So whether it's in source to pay or customer to cash, here it might be accounts payable, it might be credit and collections on customer to cash and so on. But we know the issues that make those activities inefficient, whether we automate them or not, those issues and defects are caused on the left-hand side, which is why we need to think end-to-end. So this is the idea about silo busting. We worked this out decades ago in the automotive industry. Just trying to optimize within a silo really has marginal benefit. So, and this is why technology and end-to-end process together, digitalization and end-to-end process thinking have to be done hand in hand. And of course, even the best end-to-end processes, there isn't one route through it. There isn't one journey. There are a number of necessary journeys to go through, which just makes it a little bit more nuanced and also challenges our questions on digitization and automation. So if we were to take a slightly more philosophical view and go back to our good friend Maslow and his hierarchy of needs, and you've all seen that, the pyramid on the right-hand side, and say, if we were to do a hierarchy of GPS digitization needs, we might start from collaboration, imagination, elimination, which are really all end-to-end process thinking activities, the first three, then automation, digitizing repetitive tasks, and then top-level augmentation, which is enhancing decision-making and influencing with AI. That is a very powerful hierarchy for us to consider. But the platform is we have to get the process right, otherwise it's a waste of time. So that is really key for us. And we just got to remember that this is about thinking and doing. It's about having a strategy and having a bias for action. And that's a critical thing in all the work we do, making sure that we've got actionable execution in 100-day cycles is really, really important. So this idea of the Pareto principle, I think, is absolutely central to everything we do. We all are used to these big 3-year programs, 2 to 3 year programs with a lot of sunk costs, and eventually this red line, eventually we deliver, or we hope to deliver massive value. And that red line might itself be one of the reasons why so many digital transformation programs fail to deliver on the business case. What we've got to do is do more of these Pareto projects, these things where we can deliver 80% of the value with 20% or less of the effort, cycle time and costs, do multiple cycles and add value to the strategic programs, but make P&L and operating impact on the business on 100-day cycles. Absolutely key. And we've all heard of the aggregation of marginal gains, but that's it in very, very simple ways of looking at it. It's, we do lots of Pareto projects. We can do a massive change without the risk and cost and below the waterline investment that we'd have to do with just one big cycle. So I think as Tom's research and his commentary indicates, there's no real quick fixes here, whatever we're being told. It does require us to have a plan and to execute in a coordinated manner really, really well. And I like this because it's not just about the world we're in. This is from the world of medicine and surgery, and it's the same for all of us. And it is, we do need the brains to get this done, but we also need the emotional intelligence to get it done, because it is a people business. As much as we can use all the latest technology, the irony is AI is going to make us more dependent on human behavior than we were before. So, and that's been high already. So EQ is a big part of our recipe book. And on this whole end-to-end process, applying digitalization, we do have a playbook. If those who are interested, you can get a copy of it as a little teaser for all of this stuff. We do these enablement programs. But the key thing is we've got to take action, seize the day. And with that, that is what we've covered. We are 6 minutes over, so I'm going to apologize and say we're going to respond to your questions by email. I do appreciate your time. We're trying to be conscious and respectful of your time, although I'm 6 minutes over, but that's life. But thank you very, very much indeed. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
And we're lucky he gave this presentation in English. We were rehearsing earlier in Finnish and German. And what was the other language?
Swedish.
And Swedish, yes, but we decided on English. That's good for all of us. So thank you very much. See you next time, and thanks for your attention. Have a great day.